Hello students, this week we are in Lesson 8, and this lesson covers some very interesting ground, as we continue looking at research into juvenile delinquency. We begin with the question of what impact schools can have on delinquency. You'll note that some of the same elements that characterize high-crime neighborhoods are relevant to schools. Also, you'll note that the same things we want to see in families, we want to see in schools. This should be no surprise, since today's children spend the most productive part of their days in school. This is my opinion. Based on my experience and observation, I think we often ask school teachers to mother our children, to socialize them to respect authority, to behave in conventional ways, and to learn many of the lessons children of several decades ago had already learned prior to going to school. One reason I have an opinion on this is that when I was a child there was no such term as daycare. Children often had stay-at-home mothers, and most children who were per-school age stayed either with their mothers in their own homes or with relatives if the mother worked outside the home. Today, more and more families are headed by single moms, working at least one full-time job and quite often more. My own mother was a single mom, divorcing my father when I was 7 years old. I was a junior in high school in 1973, when I finally met another young person whose parents had divorced. I know, hard to believe, but divorce is much more common today. And here's a pretty startling statistic from the 2000 census. In the U.S. Census of 1960, only 4% of births in the country were to unwed mothers. By the 2000 census, the percentage of births to unwed mothers had reached 34%. That's a very significant increase. And while I can't explain all the reasons for this shift away from the stigma of having a child out of wedlock, I can definitely say a big shift has occurred. But, maybe counterintuitively for some, a mother having a child out of wedlock and the child never knowing their father isn't necessarily a bad thing when we're speaking of the likelihood of delinquency. You'll see from our text there's some data to suggest that children who never have a father in the home may experience less strain and stress than children who begin life with an intact family and then the parents divorce or otherwise leave one another. I do know there is an enormous burden on single mothers, and that single mothers and their children are much more likely to live in poverty. My own mother got us out of a bad situation, and I'll always be grateful to her for having the courage to do what few women of her generation did: leave an abusive husband, and create a safe and nurturing life for myself and my sister. Still, if we look at the optimum situation for raising children, it's hard to argue that a biological father and mother aren't the best combination. And the quality of relationships within any family structure is key. I've often said that today many parents expect the school to mother their children, and the police to father them. You may not agree, but look around and ask yourself why I might make such a statement. Here's a not-so-fun fact. About half of all persons who get a college degree in education and become public school teachers quit within the first 5 years and never go back into teaching. Are you thinking of becoming a teacher? I hope some of you are, because it is a high calling. Just be prepared to be many more things to your young students than simply a conveyor of information. Be prepared to be a psychologist, a mother or father, a disciplinarian for some children who have never experienced discipline, a referee, and possibly a target of an angry parent's wrath when you have disciplined their child in a way the parent disapproves of. When I was growing up, the teachers and parents were all in agreement as to how I should behave. I remember wondering how my mother and father knew I'd acted out in the first grade, why I got one punishment at school, and another at home for acting out in school. Today the world is different for public school teachers, and they have to worry about many more things than the teachers of just a few decades ago. Okay, that's the end of my opining on the problems of the public school and the public school teacher today. Chapter 16 deals with something I have a good bit of experience with: delinquent peers and gangs. Here's something every adult should know, and certainly every parent should face up to. Gang membership is not a neutral activity. If a young person is a gang member, they are privy to information about crime, or they are participating in crime. It seems to be hard for sociologists and law enforcement to even define a gang, which provides gang members with much amusement, because gang members never sit around and wonder if they are really gang members. When we reach chapter 17, we are in the one chapter I've been very critical of in the textbook. It's called Other Social Influences. What effects do religion, work, the mass media, drugs, and then guns have on delinquency? Wow, that's covering a lot of ground. And it's a very short chapter. I suggested in a review of the last edition of this textbook that each of these things be dealt with in detail, in separate chapters. Agnew and Brezina did not take my advice, but frankly it still boggles my mind that all this material is lumped together and given such short shrift to boot. Would you agree that mass media's impact on delinquent behavior is probably fairly important in terms of social learning, and deserves a more detailed treatment? After all, television is still the most powerful form of mass media known to humankind. And there is a lot of very good research that shows viewing violent television increases levels of violence in a population. It's okay not to swallow everything in a textbook whole. I highly encourage you to practice your critical thinking skills on this chapter. That's the end of this mini lecture. I hope you are all working on, or have completed, your independent research papers. Remember, the deadline isn't far off, and getting things done before the last minute reduces our levels of stress and strain. If you haven't ever tried reducing strain by getting things done before the last minute, you really should try it. Just a gentle reminder, early is okay, late no way. I guess by now you know I'm going to end by saying, have fun, but be safe. Yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you. Thank you.